The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the humid morning air as 15-year-old Jaylen Williams collapsed face first onto the unforgiving pavement. His wrists bound cruelly behind his back. Blood trickled from his scraped forehead where it had struck the concrete, mixing with the sweat that had been streaming down his face moments before. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each inhale a desperate struggle as his body fought against the hypoglycemic episode that was rapidly overwhelming his system. Karen Hutchinson stood over him, her HOA security badge gleaming in the morning sun, her radio crackling with static as she called for backup that wasn't coming fast enough. The 43-year-old woman's face was flushed with the adrenaline of what she believed was a successful apprehension, completely oblivious to the medical emergency unfolding at her feet. Her polished black boots clicked against the sidewalk as she paced, occasionally glancing down at Jaylen with a mixture of annoyance and self-satisfaction. "Dispatch. This is Officer Hutchinson. I've got the suspect in custody. Teenage male, approximately 16, was running suspiciously through the residential area. He's been detained and is now, well, he's on the ground, but he's not going anywhere." The radio crackled back with a response that Karen barely heard over the sound of her own heavy breathing. What she didn't know was that Jaylen Williams was a gentle soul, known throughout Meadowbrook Estates for his quiet kindness and his struggles with a condition that had already altered the trajectory of his young life. Just 3 months earlier, Dr. Patricia Reeves had delivered the devastating news that would change everything: early-onset type 2 diabetes, a condition that required immediate lifestyle changes and constant vigilance. Jaylen's mother, Maria Williams, had cried for hours that night, holding her son close as they absorbed the weight of his diagnosis. The excess weight he carried, the fatigue that had been increasing over the past year, the constant thirst that seemed unquenchable, it all made sense now. Dr. Reeves had been clear about the treatment plan: medication, dietary changes, and, most importantly, regular exercise to help his body process glucose more effectively. "You need to start slow," Dr. Reeves had explained during their follow-up appointment, her voice gentle but firm. "A morning jog around your neighborhood would be perfect, 20 to 30 minutes, at a pace that feels comfortable. Your body needs to learn how to manage this condition, and exercise is one of the most powerful tools we have." Maria had been hesitant at first, worried about Jaylen exercising alone, but her son had been determined. "Mom, I can do this. I need to do this. Dr. Reeves said it's important, and I don't want to end up on insulin if I can help it." His determination had been both heartbreaking and inspiring, and Maria had finally agreed. With the condition that he carry his emergency glucose tablets and his medical identification bracelet at all times. For 6 weeks, Jaylen had maintained his routine religiously. Every morning at 7:30, he would lace up his running shoes, clip his medical ID to his wrist, and head out for his prescribed jog through the winding streets of Meadowbrook Estates. The neighborhood was perfect for his needs: quiet, safe, with well-maintained sidewalks and minimal traffic. He had even begun to enjoy the solitude, the way the morning air felt cool against his skin, the gradual improvement in his stamina and energy levels. The other residents had grown accustomed to seeing him pass by their homes, his steady footfalls a familiar sound in the morning stillness. Mrs. Chen from Maple Street would wave from her garden, and old Mr. Rodriguez would sometimes call out encouragement from his front porch. Jaylen had become a beloved fixture in the community, his commitment to his health inspiring several other neighbors to begin their own walking routines. But Karen Hutchinson was new to Meadowbrook Estates, having taken the position of HOA security officer just 2 weeks earlier. She had moved from an urban area where her previous experience in private security had been dealing with genuine threats: break-ins, vandalism, and actual criminal activity. The peaceful suburbs felt almost boring to her, and she had been eager to prove her worth to the HOA board, to demonstrate that their investment in enhanced security was money well spent. On this particular morning, Karen had been patrolling in her marked security vehicle when she spotted Jaylen beginning his routine jog. From her perspective, sitting in her air-conditioned car with her coffee and clipboard, she saw what she interpreted as suspicious behavior: a young man, clearly overweight, running erratically through an upscale neighborhood at an unusual hour. She had watched him for several minutes, noting what she perceived as his unsteady gait and the way he occasionally slowed his pace or stopped to catch his breath. Definitely suspicious, she had muttered to herself, reaching for her radio. Probably casing houses for a later break-in. These kids think they're so smart, but I've seen this pattern before. Karen had accelerated her vehicle and pulled alongside Jaylen, rolling down her window with the authority of someone who had never questioned her own judgment. "Hey, you stop right there." Jaylen had looked up, confused and slightly out of breath. He had been about 15 minutes into his jog, and his glucose levels were beginning to drop, a normal physiological response to exercise that his body was still learning to manage. The combination of physical exertion and the stress of being suddenly confronted by a security officer caused his blood sugar to plummet more rapidly than usual. "Ma'am," he had managed to say, his voice slightly breathless. "Is there a problem?" "Don't give me that innocent act. I've been watching you for 10 minutes, and you're clearly up to something. Running through this neighborhood, looking at houses, acting all sketchy. I'm going to need to see some identification." Jaylen had felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, and he had placed his hand against a nearby mailbox to steady himself. The movement had been purely instinctive, a desperate attempt to remain upright as his body began to struggle with the rapidly declining glucose levels. But to Karen, it had looked like he was preparing to run, or perhaps reaching for something concealed. "Whoa! Whoa! Whoa! Hands where I can see them!" Karen had shouted, leaping from her vehicle with surprising agility. "Don't even think about running." "I'm not running," Jaylen had said, his voice beginning to slur slightly. I'm just jogging. I live here. I live at 47 Oakwood Drive. I'm supposed to jog. My doctor said." "Save it for someone who cares about your sob story," Karen had interrupted, her hand moving to the handcuffs on her belt. "I've heard every excuse in the book. You're coming with me until we can verify your story." "Please, ma'am, I'm feeling really dizzy. I need to sit down for a minute. I have diabetes, and I think my blood sugar is dropping. I have glucose tablets in my pocket if you'll just let me—" "Oh, that's rich. The old medical emergency excuse. Do you think I was born yesterday?" Karen had advanced on him, her training kicking in as she assessed what she perceived as a potential threat, trying to manipulate the situation. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Now." Jaylen had tried to comply, but the simple act of turning around had caused the world to spin violently. His knees had buckled, and he had stumbled forward, grasping at the air for support that wasn't there. The movement had been clumsy and uncontrolled, his body's desperate attempt to maintain balance as his blood sugar continued to crash. "He's resisting!" Karen had shouted into her radio, though there was no one nearby to hear, except for a few early morning joggers who had stopped to watch the scene unfold. "Suspect is attempting to flee." With practiced efficiency, Karen had tackled Jaylen from behind, driving him to the ground with unnecessary force. The impact had knocked the wind from his lungs, and the handcuffs had been applied with a precision that spoke to years of training, but also with a tightness that cut off circulation to his hands. Jaylen had tried to explain again, his words coming out in gasps as he fought both the physical restraint and the increasing confusion that accompanied severe hypoglycemia. My medical ID. He had wheezed, his face pressed against the concrete. Look at my wrist. It says I'm diabetic. Please. I need glucose. I need help. Karen had glanced at his wrist, but had dismissed the medical bracelet as a fake or irrelevant. In her experience, criminals often used medical conditions as excuses to gain sympathy or create opportunities for escape. She had seen it dozens of times in her previous job, and she wasn't about to fall for it now. Especially not when she was trying to establish herself as a competent security officer in her new position. Nice try, but I'm not falling for your act. You can explain everything to the police when they get here. But the police weren't coming. Karen's radio calls had been directed to the HOA's private security dispatch, not to actual law enforcement. She had the authority to detain individuals on HOA property, but her jurisdiction was limited, and her training had been focused more on property protection than on handling medical emergencies or properly identifying genuine threats versus innocent residents. As Jaylen lay on the ground, his body began to shut down in response to the dangerously low blood sugar levels. His vision blurred, his speech became increasingly incoherent, and his movements grew weak and uncoordinated. What Karen interpreted as compliance was actually the beginning of a medical crisis that could have fatal consequences if not addressed immediately. It was then that Patricia Henley, a registered nurse who lived 3 houses down from where the incident was taking place, happened to look out her kitchen window while preparing her morning coffee. She had seen Karen's security vehicle parked at an odd angle, and curiosity had drawn her to investigate. What she saw made her blood run cold. "Oh my God," she had whispered, immediately recognizing Jaylen and understanding what was happening. She had seen similar scenes during her 23 years working in emergency medicine, and she knew that time was running out. Patricia had rushed outside, her nursing instincts overriding any concern for her own safety. "That's Jaylen Williams," she had shouted to Karen. "He lives here. He's diabetic. He's having a hypoglycemic episode." Karen had spun around, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. This is a security matter, and I have everything under control." "You absolutely do not have this under control," Patricia had shot back, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions. "That boy is going into shock, and if you don't get those handcuffs off him right now and let me help him, he could die." "He's faking it," Karen had insisted, but there was less certainty in her voice now. "This is a common tactic used by criminals to avoid detention. I've seen it before." Patricia had knelt beside Jaylen, her trained eye taking in his pale complexion, his rapid but shallow breathing, and the way his body had gone limp against the pavement. "Jaylen, can you hear me? It's Patricia Henley from down the street. I'm going to help you." Jaylen had managed to turn his head slightly, his eyes unfocused but showing a flicker of recognition. "Mrs. Henley," he had whispered, his voice barely audible. I can't feel my hands. Everything's spinning." "I know, honey. I know exactly what's happening, and we're going to fix it. But I need this officer to remove these handcuffs so I can check your pulse and get you some glucose." Karen had hesitated, her training warring with the growing realization that she might have made a serious error in judgment. The confidence that had carried her through the initial confrontation was beginning to crumble as she watched Jaylen's condition deteriorate before her eyes. "How do I know you're really a nurse?" she had asked, grasping for any reason to maintain her authority over the situation. "How do I know this isn't some elaborate setup?" Patricia had pulled out her phone, showing Karen her medical license and hospital ID badge. "I'm a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital. I've been working emergency medicine for over 2 decades, and I'm telling you that this boy is in immediate medical distress. Every second you waste questioning my credentials is a second closer to this situation becoming fatal." The word fatal had hit Karen like a physical blow. She had imagined many scenarios when she took this job catching vandals, dealing with noise complaints, maybe even apprehending an actual burglar. But she had never imagined being responsible for someone's death, especially not someone who turned out to be an innocent resident of the community she was supposed to protect. With shaking hands, Karen had reached for her handcuff key, but Patricia had already called 911 on her phone, speaking in the crisp, professional tone that healthcare workers use during emergencies. "This is Patricia Henley, RN at Mercy General. I need an ambulance immediately at the intersection of Maple Street and Oakwood Drive in Meadowbrook Estates. I have a 15-year-old male experiencing severe hypoglycemia. He's been restrained in handcuffs and is showing signs of altered mental status. ETA needs to be less than 5 minutes." The 911 dispatcher had responded with practiced efficiency, but Patricia had already begun digging through Jaylen's pockets for his glucose tablets, her movements quick and sure. She had found the small container exactly where diabetic patients are taught to keep it, and she had managed to get 2 tablets dissolved under his tongue, despite his semi-conscious state. Karen had finally removed the handcuffs, and the sight of the deep red marks they had left on Jaylen's wrists had made her stomach turn. She had secured them too tightly, and the circulation had been cut off for far too long. Patricia had immediately begun checking his pulse and blood pressure using a small monitoring device she had retrieved from her house. "His pulse is thready, and his blood pressure is dropping," Patricia had announced to no one in particular, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen this scenario play out in hospitals countless times. "The glucose tablets are helping, but he needs IV dextrose, and he needs it now." In the distance, the sound of sirens had begun to pierce the morning air, growing louder by the second. Patricia had continued her emergency care, talking to Jaylen in soothing tones while monitoring his vital signs and preparing to brief the paramedics on his condition and treatment so far. The ambulance had arrived exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds after Patricia's call, followed closely by a fire truck and 2 police cars. The paramedics had taken one look at the scene and had immediately recognized the severity of the situation. They had worked with practiced efficiency, starting an IV line and administering dextrose, while Patricia provided them with Jaylen's medical history and the timeline of events. But Karen, in a moment of panic and desperate self-preservation, had tried to reassert her authority over the situation. As the paramedics worked to stabilize Jaylen, she had stepped forward and attempted to block their access to the patient. "I'm sorry, but this individual was in the process of being detained for suspicious activity. I can't allow you to interfere with an ongoing security investigation until I've completed my report and verified his identity." The lead paramedic, a 20-year veteran named Marcus Thompson, had looked at Karen with an expression of complete disbelief. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of authority you think you have here, but I have a critically ill patient who needs immediate medical attention. You can complete your report later, but right now, you need to step aside and let us do our job. I understand your concerns, but I have jurisdiction over this property, and I can't allow—" "You don't have jurisdiction over a medical emergency," one of the police officers had interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of actual law enforcement. "And from what I can see here, you've detained a minor resident without cause and potentially contributed to his medical crisis. I strongly suggest you step back and let the paramedics work." Karen had found herself facing a circle of professionals: paramedics, police officers, and firefighters, all of whom were looking at her with varying degrees of anger and disgust. The reality of her situation was beginning to sink in, and the confident security officer who had started her shift that morning was rapidly being replaced by a woman who was realizing that her career and possibly her freedom were in serious jeopardy. The paramedics had worked for another 10 minutes, gradually bringing Jaylen's blood sugar levels back to a safe range and monitoring his vital signs until they were stable. Throughout the process, Patricia had remained by his side, holding his hand and speaking to him in reassuring tones as his consciousness slowly returned. "Jaylen, you're going to be okay," she had whispered as his eyes began to focus. "The paramedics are here, and your blood sugar is coming back up. You're safe now." Jaylen had tried to speak, but his throat was dry and his voice was hoarse. One of the paramedics had given him small sips of water while continuing to monitor his glucose levels and blood pressure. Gradually, his color had returned to normal, and his breathing had become steady and strong. "What happened?" he had asked, his memory of the past 30 minutes hazy and fragmented. "Why am I in an ambulance?" Patricia had exchanged glances with the paramedics before explaining gently. "You had a severe hypoglycemic episode during your morning jog. Your blood sugar dropped dangerously low, and you lost consciousness. But you're okay now, and we're going to make sure you stay that way." The police officers had begun their investigation while the paramedics continued their care, taking statements from witnesses and documenting the scene. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion, and their accounts of the incident painted a clear picture of what had actually transpired. "I've seen that boy jogging every morning for weeks," Mrs. Chen had told the officers. "He's always polite, always waves, never causes any trouble. His mother is Maria Williams, and they live right down the street. This is absolutely ridiculous." Mr. Rodriguez had been even more direct in his assessment. That security guard went way too far. The boy was just exercising, just like his doctor told him to do. She had no right to put hands on him, especially when he was telling her about his medical condition. As the statements were taken and the evidence was documented, it became clear that Karen Hutchinson had not only exceeded her authority, but had also potentially committed several crimes in the process. The wrongful detention of a minor, the use of excessive force, and the failure to provide appropriate medical care were all serious offenses that could result in both criminal charges and civil liability. The HOA board had been notified of the incident within an hour, and an emergency meeting had been called for that evening. Word of what had happened spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and by noon, there was a growing group of residents gathered at the community center, all demanding answers and accountability. Maria Williams had received the call at work and had rushed to the hospital where Jaylen was being observed as a precautionary measure. When she saw her son lying in the hospital bed, still pale, but conscious and responsive, she had broken down in tears of relief and rage. "How could this happen?" she had asked the attending physician, her voice shaking with emotion. "He was just doing what the doctor told him to do. He was just trying to stay healthy." Dr. Reeves had arrived at the hospital shortly after Maria, and her assessment of the situation had been both professional and damning. This could have been fatal. She had explained to the assembled family members and medical staff. Severe hypoglycemia can cause seizures, coma, and death if not treated promptly. The fact that he was restrained and unable to access his glucose tablets made the situation exponentially more dangerous. The hospital's legal department had been contacted, and they had begun documenting everything for what would inevitably become a significant lawsuit. The social worker had also been called in to assess whether Child Protective Services needed to be notified, though it quickly became clear that this was not a case of parental neglect, but rather a case of institutional failure and individual misconduct. That evening, the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center had been packed to capacity for the emergency HOA board meeting. Maria Williams had been there with Jaylen, who was still weak but determined to face the community and tell his story. Patricia Henley had also attended, bringing with her a detailed medical report and a timeline of events that left no doubt about the severity of what had occurred. Karen Hutchinson had been placed on immediate administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation, but she had chosen to attend the meeting anyway, apparently believing that she could somehow salvage her reputation and her job. Her appearance at the meeting had been met with angry murmurs and hostile stares from the assembled residents. The HOA board president, a retired federal judge named Harrison Webb, had called the meeting to order with a gravity that reflected the seriousness of the situation. "We are here tonight to address a deeply troubling incident that occurred this morning involving one of our security officers and a resident of our community. The facts of the case are still being investigated, but the preliminary information suggests that serious errors in judgment were made." Judge Webb had then called on Patricia Henley to provide her account of the incident, and her testimony had been devastating in its clarity and medical expertise. She had described in detail the progression of Jaylen's hypoglycemic episode, the dangers of restraining someone in medical distress, and the potential fatal consequences of the delay in treatment. "What I witnessed this morning was not law enforcement," she had concluded. "It was not security work. It was the systematic abuse of a vulnerable child by someone who refused to listen to medical information and refused to recognize her own limitations. Jaylen Williams could have died, and it would have been completely preventable." When Jaylen himself was called to speak, the room had fallen completely silent. He had stood slowly, still feeling the effects of his ordeal, and had spoken in a voice that was quiet but clear. "I want everyone to know that I don't hate Officer Hutchinson." He had begun, his words causing a ripple of surprise through the audience. "I think she made a mistake, a really big mistake, but I don't think she wanted to hurt me. But I also want everyone to know that what happened to me could happen to anyone. I was just trying to stay healthy, just trying to do what my doctor told me to do, and I almost died because someone decided I looked suspicious." He had paused, gathering his strength before continuing. "I love this neighborhood. I love the people here. But I shouldn't have to be afraid to go for a jog in my own community. No one should have to be afraid of that." The impact of his words had been immediate and profound. Several residents had openly wept, and the calls for Karen's dismissal had grown louder and more insistent. When Karen herself had been given the opportunity to speak, her attempts to justify her actions had fallen flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence and community sentiment. "I was just doing my job," she had said, her voice defensive and lacking any genuine remorse. "I saw suspicious activity, and I responded according to my training. I couldn't have known about his medical condition because he didn't properly identify himself or cooperate with my investigation." The response from the community had been swift and unanimous. Shouts of, "He told you he was diabetic, and he showed you his medical ID," had filled the room, and Judge Webb had been forced to call for order multiple times. Dr. Reeves had then taken the floor, and her medical testimony had been the final nail in Karen's professional coffin. Officer Hutchinson was told repeatedly about Jaylen's medical condition. She was shown his medical identification bracelet. She was informed that he was experiencing a medical emergency. She chose to ignore all of this information and continued with what she perceived as a criminal investigation. That decision nearly cost a child his life. The vote to terminate Karen's employment had been unanimous among the board members, and the decision to pursue criminal charges had been equally clear. The board had also voted to implement new training requirements for all security personnel and to establish clear protocols for handling medical emergencies. In the weeks that followed, Karen Hutchinson had been formally charged with child endangerment, assault, and violation of civil rights. The criminal trial had been swift and decisive, with the video evidence from security cameras and witness testimony painting a clear picture of her misconduct. She had been sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay substantial restitution to the Williams family. The civil lawsuit had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but the changes to the HOA's security policies had been made public as part of the agreement. New training requirements, medical emergency protocols, and community oversight mechanisms had been implemented to ensure that nothing like this could ever happen again. Jaylen had recovered completely from his ordeal, both physically and emotionally. His experience had actually brought the community closer together, with many residents taking a more active interest in understanding diabetes and other medical conditions. A community health fair had been organized, and Dr. Reeves had volunteered to provide educational sessions about recognizing and responding to medical emergencies. Most importantly, Jaylen had continued his morning jogs, though now he was often accompanied by other residents who had been inspired by his courage and determination. The sight of him running through the neighborhood had become a symbol of resilience and community solidarity, rather than something to be viewed with suspicion. Patricia Henley had been honored by the community for her quick thinking and medical expertise, but she had deflected the praise, insisting that she had simply done what any healthcare professional would do in similar circumstances. Her actions had undoubtedly saved Jaylen's life, but she had also served as a powerful advocate for proper medical care and human dignity. The story of what happened that morning had spread far beyond Meadowbrook Estates, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of racial profiling, the importance of medical awareness, and the need for proper training and oversight in security work. It had also highlighted the power of community action and the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of supposed authority. As the sun set on the community that had been forever changed by the events of that morning, Jaylen Williams laced up his running shoes once again, clipped his medical ID to his wrist, and headed out for his evening jog. This time, he was joined by Patricia Henley, Mrs. Chen, Mr. Rodriguez, and a dozen other neighbors who had decided that the best way to prevent future incidents was to create a community where everyone looked out for everyone else. The sound of their footsteps on the pavement was rhythmic and strong, a testament to the healing power of community and the unbreakable spirit of a young man who had faced his worst nightmare and emerged stronger than ever. In the distance, the lights of Meadowbrook Estates twinkled like stars, each one representing a family that had learned valuable lessons about justice, compassion, and the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect. And in that moment, as the community jogged together through the quiet streets, they all called home. It was clear that some good had come from the darkness of that morning. Karen Hutchinson's actions had nearly destroyed a young man's life, but they had also revealed the strength and character of a community that refused to let injustice stand. The healing had begun, and it would continue for years to come, one step at a time.